Hello, and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, my guest is Chris James. Chris runs Train the Sales Trainer. Now, why are we bringing Chris in today? Well, training doesn't work. The great sales training robbery is alive and well. And in all honesty, for most of the training that you're paying for or being forced to endure, you'd be better off buying lottery tickets. So, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what good looks like, what training is not. I'm sure many of you will relate to the examples that we're going to give. What should you ask when your company inflicts product training on you? What are the questions you should be asking the people training in order to use that stuff so it's actually useful? We're going to look at some learning frameworks, but what we're going to do first of all is we're going to look at how the brain learns. So without any further ado, Chris, welcome.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me, Marcus. Much appreciated.
Pleasure. So would you mind giving us 60 seconds on your history? Then we'll go straight into how the brain learns.
Okay, my name's Chris, and I'm founder and chief sales trainer at the UK's top independent training and development company for sales trainers, sales coaches, mentors, and leaders. Basically, I've got over 25 years' experience in sales training, coaching, learning, and development. I've been train the trainer for the Football Association, and I've been running the train the trainer for many years now. I run Train the Sales Trainer, a 5-day course, which is CIPD accredited for sales trainers. And I work with companies basically who really understand that sales reps, when they move into training, and that they may have great knowledge of how the adults learn, but great knowledge of sales, but very little knowledge of how to actually train that knowledge out.
Okay, so
what I say to people is, give me 8 hours and I'll give you the skills and knowledge to turn average ho-hum death by PowerPoint training into focused, structured, transformational inspiration and a CIPD qualification to go with it.
Cool. Okay.
That's me.
Thank you. So tell me this. The brain clearly doesn't respond well to the way most training works, because otherwise people would actually use it. And this is the premise of today's show, which is there is no point spending money on training unless the people trained do not transform their behavior and their performance permanently. Anything less than that, it's failed to achieve the job to be done. So let's start with the channel, the vehicle, which is the brain. What does the brain really like when it comes to learning?
Well, let's start with a phrase. We all learn exactly the same way. Some people go, no, we don't. I've got this needs, I've got that needs. But we do. Now, there's a huge debate in education right now on between people who say we all learn the same way and people say we don't. But 9 times out of 10, when people have this debate, they're conflating input and process. And there's a difference.
Right.
To see what I mean, okay, let's look at a charged example. All human beings digest food in exactly the same way. Now, I'm sure that none of you have got a problem with that statement because it's self-evident. We all have the same digestive system. Nobody has 3 stomachs or chews cud. Nobody spits out acid and it absorbs nutrients into their skin. We all have the same process by which our biology extracts nutrients for foods and excretes waste. Yeah, we take it in, it goes through the body, and it comes out again.
Yep.
We never see somebody eating poo, digesting it, and turning it into a perfect hamburger.
Well, you obviously haven't worked with my dogs. They certainly do the first part. But they seem to just do a repeat version.
So basically what I'm saying is we all have a process, yeah? And that's where it differs, right, is input. It's what we put in and how we put it in. For example, some people might be lactose intolerant. They can't ingest milk. It means that triggers in the system, is different for different people, but the process is still the same. What you can't eat or drink doesn't matter. It comes in through the mouth, it goes through the digest and comes out. Now, that's very similar to the brain, how it works. It's biology. So if we look at the brain, information has to come in. it has to be stored, and it has to come out. There is a process involved here. And that's a really important thing to understand, the process.
So let's
You,
explore the process then. For the brain to be receptive, first of all, what are the conditions that we have to create so that the brain is open to learning?
there's a few strange, well, not strange, there's a lot of research into this at the moment. And a lot of people said it's how information that comes in that's really important. But it's not. That's not the most important. It can come in many, many, many ways. It's not how it comes in that's important, it's how it comes out. So if we look at the brain, it's incredibly easy to understand. Okay, there are three key steps. The first one is encoding. Information has to get into the brain. Yeah. Now, it can be a variety of ways. For different types of people, it can be different. That's the input. It's got to be stored. It's got to get stuck there. And information has to come out. But, you know, I say it's easy, but there's certain principles that we've got to understand as sales trainers. And the first one is encoding that, we only remember what we pay attention to. That's the first principle of learning. We only pay attention. We only remember what we pay attention to. And that's fragile.
So just to interrupt, I want to reinforce something. You
Yeah.
notice the verb that goes with attention is pay. This is an investment. Learning is not something that is passive. You actually have to put some effort in. And the price of entry, the price of learning is attention. It's the currency of it. So make really certain that you understand that you are responsible for your learning, no one else. It's not the trainer's responsibility for your learning. Their responsibility is making sure that they're delivering it in such a way that you learn. But you own the learning and the practice and the implementation. Sorry, carry on.
That's cool. I mean, one of the things we've got to remember as sales trainers is what's going on in our environment. Now, research has shown us we simply can't multitask. It's not software or a skill. We simply can't do it. You see, when you multitask, you have to access the rule set of the task that determines your memory filter. What that means is what comes in and what gets blocked out. The problem is you only have one rule set. So let's say you're doing a presentation and you've got this lovely PowerPoint presentation. There's animations going on, there's a video going on. You're talking. The brain can only listen to one thing at a time. So every time you do a new activity, what it does is it clears it out. So we're drawn to animation. So the learner will be looking at animation. They won't read the words, they won't listen to you because only one thing can go into the mind. Now, if they change and look at you, they've got 0.2 second of memory filter that stops, then they listen to you and they forget what's going on in the background. And it's
Ah,
really important. I want to do a
yeah.
task review, just a little task, just to see this in motion. And it's going to sound so silly, you're going to go, oh, yeah. So, very simple, Marcus. I want you to count to 1 to 12 in 10 seconds. And people out there, nice and easy. Now, say the alphabet up to L in 10 seconds. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. Simple.
Yeah.
Now, that's easy. Now, I'm going to ask you to multitask. Do both now. A1, B2, C3 in 15 seconds. See how far you get.
A1, B2, C3, D4, E5, E6, E7.
Oh, we're struggling a bit.
Yep, absolutely, because it creates the cognitive dissonance.
It does, yeah. So what we do is 0.2 of a second goes, and then we have to rethink, and we wipe away a bit of the memory. So storing information has to get stuck there is the second principle.
Nice.
And do you know what the most important thing that we got to teach our people when we train them?
Reinforce,
I
practice.
mean, sleep. Don't go and get drunk at the end of the lesson.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Sleep is essential. At the end of the day, we sleep. This is when the brain locks down, stores the information from the day. So if we don't sleep, and we stay up most of the night, we're not going to remember hardly anything of the day before. In fact, research shows us that we lose 50% already on day one. And by the end of the next day, it's 70% of learning. So sleep is essential. Principle two of memory of the brain.
I'd like to explore how sleep affects learning, because from the stuff that I've read, not only does it help to sort, but it also sifts. So it clears out the stuff that doesn't get used and then reorders. And so there's constant rewiring when you're asleep.
Exactly.
Right. So not only is it important to sleep, but it's important to have good uninterrupted sleep, no devices at least 2 hours beforehand, or get those glasses that filter out blue light, because your brain picks up on the blue light and it tells it that it's meant to stay awake. And if you disrupt your sleep patterns, you end up fat and diabetic like I did. I wouldn't recommend it.
No, no, it's part of the culture. That's the problem.
Yeah,
Another big problem that people don't realize is sugar. How many courses have you been on where there is sugar everywhere?
yeah, absolutely.
Now, we say we're losing the energy from our brain, all this sugar's coming out of our brain and we need to replenish it. That's not the sugar we're losing. The sugar we're losing is totally different. I can't remember what it is offhand, but it's not replaced by sweets. Sweets just make you more tired. And to go back to the sleeping, basically, when we sleep, it breaks down the information so the memory can store it.
And what about forgetting? Because forgetting seems to be an integral part of learning.
It depends where we look at it. I mean, I'll go back to that. Memories are constantly rewritten, as you've said. We forget things and then we remember them different, or we rewrite our memory,
Yeah,
which is not necessarily a good thing. What I want to go back is the mind. I talked about it's got to go in, it's got to stay, but the most important thing of all is it has to come out.
mm,
And if we want real long memory experiences, recall is the key. As I said, it's not how you put it in, it's how you put it out.
yeah.
See, when it comes to making deep memory, researchers have found we have been looking in that wrong place. It's more important how it comes out than how it goes in. See, if you access a memory, the memory gets stronger and it beds itself. So when you talk about do role play, if it's correct role play and someone's taught you to role play properly, then that memory will get bigger. But if you're doing role play and you just leave them to do role play with their peers, then memories are rewritten because people have opinions on their and things change slightly. So access to memory, it gets stronger and it beds itself. That's called recall. Every time you access a memory, you make it more comfortable and easier to access. Therefore, when we plan lessons, we need to give them lots of opportunities to demonstrate and consolidate their learning. Role play is not enough. Games for learning, different styles of feedback, different styles of assessment. It's so important.
Stuff like practicing with different contexts is important, because the
Totally.
brain learns through context. It scaffolds the memories on the experience in a moment, and we forget this. The net result of that is that we end up teaching people dogma. We teach them a technique instead of the building blocks of a technique and the context in which it's appropriate to use it. And this is why the experience of buying from people who are trained in perfectly viable and good systems is often horrific, because they use it as a weapon and they obsess with the technique instead of actually trying to understand how to relate to another human being's brain. Because that's the channel that we sell to. It's the channel that we sell through as well. So if we don't understand ourselves and our impact on others, then the chances of us actually being able to be effective in role are extremely limited. And this is why practice needs to be intentional. It needs to be deliberate. And you practice as if you mean it, not going through a half-assed version of it for a bit of a giggle, because that isn't learning.
That's right. And one of the major problems in sales trainings, coaching, is people don't know how to run it effectively. They don't know how to run, for example, role plays. They don't know how to coach. They haven't been taught, and it is a skill. When we look at role play, there's a whole methodology of role play. We show them perfect practice. That may be a video, that may be us demonstrating. But what happens then is they tend to send people off and say, right, go and practice that in pairs. That's not how we do it. What we've got to do is make sure each of those individuals have been allowed to demonstrate their knowledge to us. So we know they've got it right before they go and practice. Because whenever we teach things, people have different perspectives of what we're saying. So what we tend to do is a typical role play would be, let's say an onboarding. So, right, this is how to deal with an objection. Go and practice in threes. One of you is going to be the customer, one's going to be the seller, and one is going to give feedback. Okay, off you go. And you leave them to it. And you've got three different people with three different interpretation of the learning. And so it just gets lost. And they come back and say, how was that for you? And they go, oh, that was really good. Okay, right, next topic. And we've not actually seen if they know it. A simple coaching formula, stop, demo, rehearsal, live. Go into that group of three. You have the responsibility, not them, not those three. You're the judge adjudicator. You're the person with the knowledge. They're the learners. Go and listen to them. If they're doing it wrong, stop. Re-demo. Don't be scared to re-demo the information. Then practice individually you again. Then let them go in the three and do it again. Because role play is so important to get it right. And really, you shouldn't be doing it with three people of the same ability. You should have someone who's a lot more ability in that group to provide constructive feedback.
Certainly with role plays, one things that I do like to do is make sure that they're very diverse, and the different types of people that they have to deal with, the different situations, the different contexts, whether people are positive, neutral, or negative, what their communication preferences are. And we take the same moment and we attack it from all those different angles over and over and over again, so that people
Yeah.
learn the building blocks of communication, not a technique. And this, I think, is the really important point that we need to get across. No one buys off your technique. They'll buy in spite of it. But what they're really looking for is someone who understands their situation and can make them feel safe on the way to solving that problem or achieving the better future that they're renting. If you spend your time talking about product or trying to sell to them, you're going to trigger their brain to see you as a threat. So again, let's explore some of the things that we are teaching people to do that actually work counter to the objective of getting customers to buy, and in fact drive people into anticipated buyer's remorse.
I don't know where to go with that one.
Oh, right. Okay. So, well, I'm curious. Let's try it again. What is it that we're doing in terms of traditional training that encourages salespeople to do behaviors that create the wrong response and the wrong reaction in the buyer's brain?
You see, I don't think that's necessarily sales training. I think that's mindset training. Well, that's part of sales training. Mindset's a different thing. If I look at
Okay. So,
sales,
so just
well,
clarify what you mean by sales training, then.
so sales training, I mean by really, what do I mean by sales training? Sales training is really the skills and techniques of sales. So, example, how would you make a product lesson simple? How would you design training lessons? You see,
Right.
you're seeing it from a different perspective to me.
Okay. Fair enough.
You're seeing it
Well,
far
let's
more
move on.
advanced than I'm. Yeah.
Okay, fine. I just want to make sure that we're aligned, because otherwise the show doesn't work. Okay, let's try a slightly different angle then.
Maybe what sort of recommendations would you do to help a sales trainer, a sales manager manage
Okay,
or do
fine.
training?
Okay, got it. So tell me this then, Chris. I'm a new sales manager and I've been a really strong individual contributor. Now I'm faced with having to develop my team, grow them, and I've got no idea where to start. Help me out.
Well, I would start by learning the techniques and skills of sales training. You know, my course, the trainer sales trainer course, that kind of thing. Because what you're going to need is an arsenal. You're going to need to be able to teach complex material. You're going to need to design the perfect lesson where people learn and have great learning experiences. You're going to have to understand accelerated learning. You want people to get there quicker than they have been. You need to learn all these principles and tools. I mean, let's look at one of them, the Feynman technique. Now, I think it's E.F. Schumacher said, any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex, and more violent. But it takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction.
Right.
You know, we come into these lessons, they've got death by PowerPoint. They've done nothing except for read a book, read off slides. They haven't spent any time understanding you, the person.
I remember one of the 3 days of sales training I had in my first 17 years of my career. And two of them were spent listening to the CEO read from the Strategic Selling book by Miller Hyman. And that was training. It was just excruciating.
Yeah. Well, the Feynman technique is straightforward. It helps you quickly develop in-depth understanding of the most complicated theories and topics. If we look at Feynman himself, he was a nuclear physicist in the 50s. And the government decided they wanted to teach, after what happened in World War II, go around schools and university and teach nuclear fission, whatever it was, in a simple method. Now, he went around and he found the first 2 days, everyone was looking at him, like, what's this strange man doing in my bedroom? I haven't got a Scooby-Doo what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So he went back and he designed the Feynman theory, okay? And how can you simplify things? How provide a clear overview of a product? So what he wanted to do is his famous quote was, pretend to teach a concept you want to learn to your grandma. As Einstein said, you don't really understand something unless you can explain it to your grandma. So Feynman sort of had this three sort of steps he invented. So one was pretend to teach it to your grandma. Now you couldn't do that. So identify gaps in that explanation. Go back to the source material, understand it, then re-look at it, organize it, and simplify it again. Simplify it and simplify. Try and get it down to one passage that you think your grandma would understand. And if you can do that, then you can teach anyone, my son. You know what I mean? You can teach anyone. So that's one really interesting principle I think about. And I guess another one is we're talking to sales leaders, sales trainers here. How many people have ever heard of Rosenshine's principles of instruction? This is the stuff that, when you're designing lessons, how do people actually learn? So Rosenshine, what he did in, I think it was around about 1998, he was a professor in the Department of Education at Illinois, I think. Basically, they looked into cognitive science, research on classroom practices of master teachers, and cognitive support. And basically, they found what they consider, I don't know how many is it, it's about 10 key things that will ensure that your lessons will help people learn. Now, I will try to go through a couple of them if you want.
Yes, please.
Okay, so what you need to do is start. So if we think of the perfect lesson, so the accelerated learning lesson is very simple. It's connect the learning to what's gone before. So begin a lesson with a short review of previous learning, a daily review, that kind of thing, how it ties in. Activate the learning, make sure that you demonstrate and you show the learning that's needed. Next is demonstrate, let them demonstrate what they know and what they've learned from the learning, and consolidate. Give them chances to do it in live actions, in live environment. Are they doing it right? Can we give them feedback? Now, his second principle was to present new material in small steps with sales reps and practice after each step. Don't go through a load of stuff and then go back. After each thing you want them to learn, practice it, get it perfect. Only present small amounts of new material at any time, and then help them with the practice. That's really important because, we talk about chunking and how the brain works. Let's think of our brain. Let's go back to the digestive system, okay? You wouldn't put a watermelon in your mouth. Okay. But you would chop a watermelon up into little pieces and eat it slowly. And that's really what learning is all about. It's not about trying to stuff a whole watermelon in our face. It's about slowing down and eating slowly. So another thing his principle is about questions. We don't ask enough questions as salespeople, sales trainers. It's important to ask a large number of questions because they help students practice new information. So I think the most successful sales trainers spend more than half the lesson lecturing, demonstrating, and asking questions. The rest of the time it's all done on the learner.
Certainly, from the experience that I've had over the years training and coaching, the more you can seed up front and leave loose ends in preparation for the next session, the better. So it's always good to leave them with unanswered questions, because then you can tap the reticular activating system, who, when they recognize it, they said, suddenly it's a loop to close, and they get a big dopamine hit. And I think part of the problem with a lot of learning is it doesn't feed the junkie brain. Every few minutes, it needs a dopamine hit to keep it engaged. And
Yeah.
if the training doesn't engage them in that way, then it's mostly lost anyway, which explains the forgetting curve.
If we think of let's look at a typical lesson, one of my lessons I run. Okay. Company facts and figures. Is that not the most boring lesson people do? They normally look at an old picture from 1998 of a grainy picture of two blokes in a garage somewhere where they started the company. And then they had to look at all these facts and figures. They don't remember that. It's PowerPoint. So how can we make learning? So what we need is something called touch points. We need to accelerate their learning. First thing, start the sales rep on their own. Ask them to find the information. Now, let's say we're onboarding, and that's facts and figures. We can accept that the new starters have been to university and they have done independent study. They've learned communication, critical thinking, things like that. So what we want to do is start putting some of that, getting them comfortable here. Because if we talk about other things to do with onboarding, we understand that it can also hinder learning. So the first thing I do is get them on their own, do a little bit of independent research. Find 9 things that are great about this company. List their favorite, and in a diamond formation. Number 1, your best, 2, 3, 2, 1. Right, so that's the first start of learning there is they've had to research themselves. Now they've had to decide what they think are the best 9 in order, and they've had to put them in order. So that's a minimum of 3 touches. Okay. Now get them in pairs or in threes. Discuss as a pair of 3 what's not there, what they think's their best, second, third, etc., down to 9, and then agree as a 3 what you think the top 9 are. Now get them into away groups. So what we do is one stays, and 2 or 3, however that group is, go and look at other people's. And they discuss the reasons why theirs is top, second, third, and what the difference is between theirs and the new ones they're looking at. And they go around each group. Now the group return and they rediscuss what they think the top 9 should be. And this works on any sort of lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was best, I think that was best, blah, blah, blah. It's another touch point. So then they go for a break, and then I do these are the top 9 things I want you to remember, basically. And in the morning, they've got to come back and do a presentation on the top 3 they think the company are. And that's where I want to base, hopefully, I'd have encouraged them that the 3 values the company have are in those top 3. So the fact that they were made in 1998 and Tim and Sam were the started out founders has nothing to do with the telephone call I want them to make. So I try to make it those top 3. Now, the last thing I do on that day is I want them to design a slogan to explain the company. So let's say they work for Nike, just do it. So I want them to do a 1-line slogan that says what the company is. So then The next two days after that, we do Kahoots. So in the morning they come, we do a Kahoot to ensure that the memory sticks. Because I want them to be a certain way along when they come to Friday. So touch points, learning, how people learn on their own, research, writing down, for example, in pairs, sharing ideas, learning from each other. In groups of four, communication, problem solving, accountability, shared identity with other groups. Away groups, questioning, delegating, cooperation, critique. One person stays behind, storytelling, negotiation, justification. And then the next day, presentation, creativity, overlearning, creating videos and things like that. Kahoot, competition, the speed, accuracy. Their competition they have is immense. Now, I've just done an hour and a half lesson there. And how much learning do you think takes place?
Lots, because
Lots and
they're
lots. And
well,
then,
they're actively involved. They're
yeah,
creating the answers themselves. They're doing peer-to-peer learning. They're coming up against people who disagree with them. And that is vital in your learning, because otherwise you can't grow and you just end up listening to the echo chamber. There's testing, you're priming the brain for the following day. They then have an exercise to implement it. So, I mean, there's at least 7, 8, 9, 10 different ways that I've just described that are surface level, where they're getting exposure to the material and taking ownership of it, which is the important part, because otherwise they're never going to use it.
no, no. I mean, there are other examples of that. I mean, we call this accelerated learning because we learn best when we're engaged.
Yeah.
So a good example is when we're doing the value proposition or 30-second commercial, or you want them to say something, add value, do your value prop. So what we want them to do is own the value proposition, be so comfortable in saying it and so believe in it. And a great way of doing that, believe it or not, is to give them the value prop you want to give them, 3 lines. Okay, so it might be we're cheaper. That's a terrible example, but you get the idea. And they go away and film it. And I say to them, what I want you to do is I want you to film this. I don't want it to be anything to do with the product. I want it to be with something other product. And I want it to show the culture of where you're filming. So, for example, I was in London or Singapore, if I'm doing this in New York. So they go out into the streets of New York and they go and film it. So they get in groups of 4, and the first thing they do is they read the 3 sentences. Now they've got to decide how they're going to put that into context with something else. Then they decide how they're going to train it, where they're going to train it. So then they go and actually film it. How many mistakes do you make when you film things? Me
Well,
personally,
well,
tons.
one of the things that I work with is a resource that allows you to do asynchronous coaching. So I can identify a moment that you need to practice and say, Chris, I noticed that when we were talking about the price rise, your voice cracked a little bit. Do you mind if we talk about it? We coach it for a couple of minutes and then we come up with a practice moment. They then
That's
go
cool.
away. Yeah, but they go away and practice and then they upload the video. But on average, they record the video 4 or 5 times before they upload it. And that's the thing I love best, because they become self-aware. And
Yeah.
nothing is more powerful than self-awareness. When the penny finally drops and you think, oh shit, that's how I'm causing other people to respond. Now I understand. And that's incredibly powerful. So the whole piece is that we've been talking about, again, is about creating engagement for the brain, giving it the hooks it needs to stay engaged, and to look at the problem through many different lenses so it works out under pressure how to use what it's learned in order that the training is actually applied instead of them just reverting back to what they learned first, which is the normal outcome of 98% of all training that's paid for.
Yeah, we try to get them out of the classroom and out of the comfort zone. We challenge them. We make them think, take risks, have fun. That's how people learn. They really do learn when they're engaged.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I've been in many training room and I've sat there and I've looked at the PowerPoint. And sometimes I've looked at the trainer sitting in front of the PowerPoint, talking on a screen in front of me, reading out exactly what's on that PowerPoint. And I'm like, oh, beam me up, Scotty.
Again, so for anyone who does that, let's just put a business case against it. Each person in the room has a quota. So let's say it's £1,000,000. That means they need to generate £4,000 a day. Every hour that person is in the room, there is an opportunity cost that you, as the trainer, must recover by delivering at least £500 worth of value per person that is in the room. If you have a room of 80, all of a sudden we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour. You better be on top of your game, because your job is to help these people improve. It's not to deliver content. No one hires you so that you can read from a book or you can pontificate. They hire you because they want their results to improve. That is the purpose of training. If you're a manager, you only have 3 lines on your job description, as far as I'm concerned. Hire the best people, create the conditions for them to do their best work every day, and protect them from acts of idiocy from above, primarily you. Now, if you do the second one, that involves training, coaching, mentoring, ride alongs, planning, strategizing, and all the stuff that you claim you haven't got any time for. And the reason you haven't got any time is you're doing a shit job of training and you're not coaching. That's the blunt, cold, hard reality of it. Because when managers coach and train their people for about 3 hours a month per person, you see average quota attainment of 104%. Where they don't, it was around 40%. It's now as low as 27%.
You think you look at coaching as well. You look at managers coaching. I remember I went to Cleveland. Someone sent me there to analyze a coach, and they were doing a one-to-one feedback session.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't realize how important it is to get one-to-one feedback right. So I've gone into this and I've gone through the corridors of power into the training room. I've met this young lady, and she's told me about this sales. It was a BDR, and she sat down and she literally, this is how it went. She went, "Hi, how's your week been?" "Oh yeah, it's been a bit frustrating. Oh, well, it's you know what I mean? It's been a bit this and a bit that." "Well, tell me 3 things you've done well this week." "Well, I thought I made at least 20 calls yesterday and I did this and I did that." "Oh, well done. Well, tell me 3 things you think you could improve this week." "Well, I was late the other day and all this and that." "Oh, okay. Well, right. Let's set your goals for next week. Let's make sure you're on time every day and you're ready for sales at 9 o'clock. Does that sound fair?" "Yeah, that sounds great." "Okay, thanks. I'll see you next week. Cheers."
Um,
About as much use as, oh,
you've just paid 2 people to not produce anything.
exactly. I mean, I look at things like the Grow coaching model. I mean, you should have a model, something that you use where you get the information out of the other person, that you dig deep into what they're doing. So you get a great understanding. Now you've got the metrics, you know what they're doing, you know what time they get to work, if you want to include that, you know exactly how they're performing. So if you lose something like grow, you know, what do you want to gain from this? The reality is you're doing this and it's not good, or it is good. You know, what are the options open for you? You could do this, you could do that. This person could help you. You could do sales training on that. Will, do you want it? Are you going to set those goals and are you going to keep them? And then, say a month or weeks later, I can go back, normally a month, and I'll look at it and say, well, what did you do? Are you a keeper?
So
And you know,
this again speaks to another really important behavior that almost no one does. And I'm guilty of doing it sporadically too. But those of my clients who don't keep a journal, I'll get about 30 to 50% uplift in sales. That's a walk in the park. The ones who keep a journal and reflect on a regular basis, their average uplift in sales is 300 to 1200%.
I think another thing we've got to look at as well, especially as sales leaders, do we measure solely by metrics or do we measure by performance as qualitative analysis that we can listening to calls like Gong, listen to what they're saying, what the replies to the customer is, what their reply is, and the kind of pain funnels or whatever you're doing. A lot of people, they don't do that. They don't understand qualitative analysis. And qualitative analysis is quite easy, is you have a kind of structure to your phone call, and you have questions you want them to ask, or you want the ways to go, and you just map that out. And when you talk to the person, you can say, well, this is the question you asked the customer, this is what the customer said, and this is what the response was. How do you think that could be improved? Or what could you have said to lead the customer to this value?
Mhm.
Qualitative analysis is such a powerful tool. I don't think hardly anyone uses it because we're
Well,
so obsessed with metrics
I
and
couldn't
not
agree more. I
performance.
mean, the obsession with metrics is unhealthy, especially when you end up measuring stuff that doesn't improve the performance. If you're just looking for metrics that are about reporting what has happened, then fine and dandy, but don't ever ask a salesperson to capture that information for you, because that's a waste of their time. Their job is not producing reports from Salesforce or whatever. And if you're having them track a metric, have them track a metric that's actually meaningful to them doing their job better. Things like second meetings. No one tracks second meetings. But does it surprise you that 7 out of 8 first meetings on average don't result in a second? Well, that speaks volumes to, first of all, looking upstream to the causes of this. Is it the bad leads? Is it something we've done to cause these people not to buy from us? Well, as a manager, as a trainer, those kind of moments are really vital in terms of constructing training that's relevant and applicable in the field today by your people. And again, I think so much training is based on stuff that was out of date when Queen Victoria was in nappies.
But part of what you're saying there is I went into a company and they had a massive drop off between disco demo and the next call. They couldn't understand it. Have you looked at have you looked at what everyone's doing? No, not really.
Yeah.
Have you taught them what to do? No, well, they're AEs, they know what to do. So we assume that people know. Instead of actually looking at the performance, we assume that they know how to do things. And
Well,
that is such a big bugbear of mine.
absolutely. Well, the onboarding process. The first 120 days of a new hire, they are putting you, the job, the company, and the people, the customers, the product on probation. Is this the job I was sold? Is my boss an ass? Do I like the people I'm working with? Do I like the products, the company, the customers? Is the commute okay? Was I better off my last place? Would I be better off somewhere else? Is there any possibility that what they told me at the interview is ever going to pan out? When will I get my target? Yeah. Now, what people need is certainty. They need clarity. That first 120 days, the onus is on the new manager, whoever the hiring manager is, to dedicate about 25% of their time for at least 3 months to onboarding that person. Otherwise, you've just spent a load of money, probably the price of a small mortgage, to recruit them, only to have to do it again.
And one of the things is we haven't looked into models of learning either. Cognitive, how people learn and what stage should they be at. So where should they be at the end of the onboarding, say week 2? Where should they be at the end of the month, 6 weeks? And because people don't understand, they've never studied Pitts and or his name is models of learning. They don't understand where the person is. And regularly, I do an onboarding, and on the Monday, we've got to remember they're still in the cognitive stage. They still don't really know what they're doing. They've had their comfort zone. They've done it with their peers, and they're all confident with their peers. Now they're on the dog and bone. All of a sudden, reality bites. All those little things that they were so easy talking to Susie and Peter about are completely different because there's a human being with not much time on the other end of the phone.
And importantly, who doesn't have your script in front of them to follow. So don't use scripts. Stop using playbooks as if they're dogma, as if they're written in stone by God. They're not. They're a framework. They're a tool to remind you that these are areas of important discovery and that we should be helping the customer advance their understanding. So let's spend a bit of time on training around questioning, because that I'm just deeply, deeply troubled by. I remember, and it hasn't changed really much since I was my first training session with Nick Nicholson. And the first lessons he taught me were don't ask closed questions and don't ask why questions, which were two of the worst bits of advice I had ever been given. Now, I
Yeah.
get why questions can be abrasive, so sometimes you have to ask them in a different guise. But if you're not getting to why, then in all probability, you can't find another human being's motivation. So, talk to me about what we need to do in order to help people develop great questioning skills.
I think we need to start. I think you talked about, was it spin earlier on?
Right.
And one of the things I like about spin is understanding implied and explicit needs. So often someone will say, oh, blah, blah, I ain't got enough time. Sorry, I haven't got enough time. And I go, okay, time, he hasn't got enough time. Brilliant. I'm going to drop all my pants on that now. Okay. So our product will give you exactly the time you need. How does that sound? Well, she's got an applied need. So we need to get to understand that need, time. So what do you mean by that? Well, we're a small team here and I don't necessarily have time to do this, that, and the other. Well, how many are in your team? Blah, blah, blah. How's that impacting along? Blah, blah, blah. We need to dig deep into each implied need. So that's my first thing I would say is we had to change implied to explicit. I think one of the best ways, I mean, there are so many pseudonyms and all these difference, but is to use a language you're comfortable with. Now, I really like my comfortable language is, what do you mean by that? Walk me through. Just walk me through how that's what's happening at the moment. So everyone's got their own way. And what you've got to find is not Marcus's way, not Chris's way. You've got to find your personality in action. And you've got to find how you like to ask questions in the pub. You go home, how have things been, mum? Blah, blah, blah. How you talk to people, you have to find who that person is.
Yeah,
So,
you've got to speak with your voice. And this
yeah,
is again another reason why rote learning is a disaster, because I might have learned a technique or might have developed a technique in a particular context. But if I apply that technique as a generic approach without really understanding what's going on under the skin and inside the buyer's brain, then odds are I'm going to piss people off. For years, I was teaching people how to do negative reverse selling. It's brilliant in the right context, applied well. It's awful, and you sound like an absolute arse if you use it at the wrong time. The problem with technique that it doesn't really bear any relation to reality, and it fails in the one big area which I think is completely missing from almost every training program, which is listening, deep listening.
I
They
think
teach active listening, which is essentially mimicking people and pissing them off.
I think what you've got to look at before when we talk about question skills is the ability of the person who's delivering the sales call.
Mm.
Now, if someone's 2 months in, they're still at a certain stage of their learning. They do not have the product knowledge or generally the capability to get too deep because they've had to learn product, they've had to learn this, learn that. And how many calls do you actually get through to? How many people actually listen to you? And we've got to put all these into context. So how much experience have they had of asking questions? Now, hopefully, when they get to 6 months, you're hoping they're going to start to be able to sit with uncertainty and they're going to be able to ask great questions. But we have to know where on this turn. And that is, I think, one of the hardest things for people to realize
Do you
is what
reckon?
we get at each month. Some people say, right, there's a thing called the transfer dilemma. And the transfer dilemma is when people leave university, they're taught certain skills. We talked about that earlier, critical thinking, communication, etc. And they're taught in a university. They can't apply these skills to sales because it's a different environment. And it's an actual scientific study done called the transfer dilemma. And it takes them to transfer those skills into their new environment, something like, I think they reckon 12 months to be as good as they were at uni as they are at selling. Which also adds to the point, then why do we get university people?
It's unnecessary mostly.
But there
It-
are lots of different things. And when we look at questionings, they only become comfortable when they are in their comfort zone.
which again comes through deliberate intentional practice and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Time and again, we see the emphasis of training on completion and retention of the learning, which is what L&D tend to measure on. HR, more often than not, it's a tick in the box to make sure that they're investing in their people and they can tick the IIP box. For the hiring manager, often it's something that either it's done against their will because now their people are off the road, or they're doing it. And I've seen this happen more than once because Tim Nice but Dim, who he doesn't want to fire, really needs some help and he's not responding to the individual administrations. So they do group training in the hope that Tim will learn. It doesn't. And basically, it's 2 days hungover. Then you've got management. Management's hoping to see a performance improvement, but then they ask for all the wrong stuff. To asking me to do a cold call training without understanding whether or not people are psychologically geared up to make a cold call is a pointless exercise. Because if they're not going to come out the starting gate, all the technique in the world will be irrelevant. So I think very often training needs to be far better thought through in terms of the outcome we're trying to achieve and reverse engineering it instead of saying we've got a problem with this symptom and then throwing some money and time at it.
That's
So
right.
tell me this.
Another thing
Okay.
is once you've done the training, the follow up of the training. So someone like me, a freelancer, I come in, I do my session, and I leave them with 1, 2, 3 week follow ups, things they should be doing, and they're very rarely done because the sales manager doesn't implement it. He just lets them get on with it. Off you go, son.
So again, you've made another really important point, which is that the manager is the most pivotal person to involve in the training because they have to reinforce it day to day when you're not around. And their people are more likely to take a steer from them than they are from you, unless the boss is an ass. But even then, because they're being told to do it, more often than not, they will. Now, this is where the problem lies, because when you put managers in who don't know how to manage and don't know how to train and coach, they do what was done to them, which made them a pretty effective but selfish individual contributor, not a team player who believed his job was or her job was to get everybody over the line together. And when you move into management, there's a really useful model that I'd strongly recommend everyone use. I've lifted it from Mike Michalowicz and I've adapted it. So if you imagine there's quadrants, but in the middle, you've also got a rectangle. And in the top left, you've got doing, top right, deciding, bottom right, delegating, bottom left, designing, middle, developing. If you think about where most managers spend their time, it's in doing, deciding, and delegating. Well, decisions are best made by people who are closest to the decision, closest to the customer. So, what do you as a manager have to do to be able to trust your people to make those decisions? How do you delegate responsibilities so you can free yourself up from the £10 and £100 an hour activities and free yourself up to spend time on £1,000 and £10,000 an hour activities? Imagine the difference if every day you spent 8 hours on £1,000 and £10,000 an hour activities instead of 10 and £100 activities. What impact might you have as a manager? Well, this comes through training, through coaching, through reinforcing the good behaviors and going on ride alongs with people and not making excuses and not making them psychologically unsafe to take risks.
So true. So true.
So, look, we've come to time. Tell me this. You've got a golden ticket and you can go back and whisper in the ear of the idiot Chris, age 23. You knew everything, you were invincible, you'd live forever. And what one bit of advice would you whisper in his ear that undoubtedly he'd have ignored?
I would say basically have a focus, plan out what you want to achieve and when. Don't take it too seriously. I'd say surround yourself with positive people, go to live shows, take weekends off, have fun with your free time. enjoy life. But I'd also say to my 23-year-old, travel to faraway destinations when you're young. Because
Bloody
when you get older, God, it's hard to sleep on that plane.
melatonin. There you go.
That's my heading.
So, Chris, this has been really interesting. Thank you very much. How can people get hold of you?
Anyone who's looking to make real difference and lasting training memories, I suggest you go to traintheSalesTrainer.com and have a look at the Train the Sales Trainer license.
Lovely. Chris James, thank you.
Marcus, thank you very much.
Pleasure. So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you found this useful and insightful, then please take notes, listen to it again, send it out to someone who might benefit from it, and tag them. If you want to leave a review, a 1-star to 5-star, don't care, just leave an honest review on whatever podcast platform you use. And if you are somebody who would really like to get an insight into how you're affecting your buyer's brain and what threats and risks you are creating inadvertently, then please, at the bottom of this blurb, you'll find the selling aptitude test link. Please take that. If you want the full report and a half-hour debrief, no cost, just book it after you've done the profile, and then I'll give you a free consult. I will not even try and sell you training or coaching either. If you want to talk about it, you can ask and volunteer, but I'm not going to push you. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.